Hey, it's Alex. Hey, I have this really strong urge to tell you all something. And it's something that I don't say a whole lot, and it's something that I have just until very recently started writing down in blogs for work and for my own, my wife and I's blog site, 53206.org. I don't know if I'm supposed to be able to say that out loud or not, but that's the blog site that we use, or we're putting content out on. And I have this like really strong urge that we're in a time where we can make things, we can create inequities, or we can start creating a more equitable system. And so I just want to get some of this information out there. So over the next week or so, I'm going to have 10 kind of longer blog posts, and I'm going to have 10 little videos like this, and then the audio I'll put into a podcast form because I am hoping that we can get some of this information out to anybody that is like would find it to be useful. So I don't know a better way. I've been trying to like freestyle some of this and just say like not have to read the blog post, but it's not really working. So I'm just going to read you the blog post so that you can access it in audio form or video form, depending on what is better for you. So without any further ado, here we go. It's odd to me that every time I sit down to write a blog post, either for West Allis, West Milwaukee, or my own site, 53206.org, that I feel the need to preface what I'm about to say. It's not like I say anything overly offensive or even controversial. In fact, I'm so worried about offending someone usually that I overthink like every little thing that I want to write down, to the point where like it takes forever to get the words from here onto the screen. I used to think it was like a hyper-focused desire to not make someone uncomfortable, or like even worse, like make someone think that like I'm any better than anyone else. And I hope you guys I can just tell you I'm not better than you at all. And then like another layer has always been like this insecurity of like how to figure out how to adequately or appropriately view my life experiences. And so, one of the first times I ever even told anyone outside of the people I work with at Dotkey that I live in the inner city of Milwaukee was at a BLT, Building Leadership Team meeting, like 7 years after I started working with our school district. If you guys know Laz had us talking about something, and I just had this again, like I do now, like this intense urge to share that part of my life. And up until very recently, I thought the decision my wife and I made to move into the poorest zip code in Milwaukee, which also happens to be 99.2% non-white, I really just thought it was like for personal growth, or like almost even like a hobby, or like just my way of like being an individual. And I didn't really ever think that it was something that we should share. I didn't really know how to do that appropriately. And so when I came up with an idea, or if I like view like an interaction with a kid at work in a different way or a certain way, like most of the impetus behind that is how my thoughts and opinions have been shaped through living in a neighborhood where the median household income is $24,000 a year. And I've had a really hard time figuring out how that matters in education. So here's like some thoughts on that. So like I actually think it has like everything to do with education. So I've got a neighbor. My neighbor's son, he doesn't work. He pretty much standard like in the cup holder of his SUV when he's driving back and forth between wherever he lives and the house next to me. Usually got a beer in the cup holder. This guy loves playing loud music and honking, and is really good at bass, whatever that means. Like there's always bass. And because of the bass and the honking and sometimes the yelling, I know like he comes to visit his mom a lot. She lives next to me, and he comes by a couple of times a day. Patricia is my neighbor's name, and she's old and frail and has to get up at 4:30 every morning to go for dialysis. I have a feeling that life hasn't been as kind to her as it has been to me. And I don't think it's been all that kind to Lavelle either. We're about the same age. On appearances, like you might see that like he and I, like that'd be the only similarity between he and I. But because I know him, I know we have way more in common than we don't. However, we still like have lives that look nothing alike. And I think probably like the thing that we have most in common is that we're just a couple of guys like trying to get by with doing the best they can. There's like ways that I've like tried to advance my efficiency, or like when I'm at work, like try to produce more in a day. But really at the end of the day, like I'm just trying to get from today, the beginning of today to the end of the day. And we're just doing the best we can. So what does it have to do with education? So we got to think about this for a second. So like I went to high school and Lavelle went to high school, and on a micro level, my best, like the outcomes of my best compared to the outcomes of his best, could be explained away. You could say, well, I did these things and he did these things, and maybe I just made different decisions or better decisions. And I don't want to discount the fact that like I have 4 paid-for houses, even though that in the inner city that doesn't necessarily mean what it means somewhere else, because the prices are way different. But like I got ahead, and he, like on the surface or financially, really we didn't. Like I did this thing with my education, and he did something else. Basically, we got 2 people, 2 different results. But when I stop and I'm in my neighborhood and I look around, like there's way more people that have the same outcomes as Lavelle, who are all well-intentioned, awesome people, but it just didn't pan out the same way that it did for me. They just can't get out of the cycle of poverty, and when I see that, it's not just me and one other person, it's a whole bunch of other people, and I can point and point and point and point to different people in the neighborhood. So I guess what I want to say by that is a zip code, mine, 53206, that has an incarceration rate of around 50% isn't formed randomly. It's created, like it's birthed. And that's like kind of like what happens. Like this neighborhood didn't come out of nowhere. It was formed. And the educational process is like another version of that. Like it's like growing, it's kind of like actually like growing a baby inside of a womb. Like school is a safe place. You're sheltered from the outside world. It's where an individual is nurtured, and then on graduation day, they're sent out into the world, ready to crush it. Only that doesn't always happen that way. And the thing is it happens. Like people that look like me, for some reason, are ready to go out and crush it, and it doesn't always happen for somebody that looks like Lavelle. And, you know, you can take that for what it is. But what I'm really scared of, and what I think is the scary thing is, like, the results of my life are going to be praised. And in a lot of ways, the results of Lavelle's production or whatever you want to call it, like, it's just going to be used as an excuse to not like him or hate him, I guess. But the thing is, it was like there was a diverging point. Like there was a point where I was set on my pathway and he was set on his pathway. And the diverging point between his life and mine probably happened before we were 18 years old. It probably happened even sooner than that, maybe when we were both in elementary school. If you know anything about me, I'm good at memorizing things and seeing patterns. And if you're good at memorizing things and have a knack for pattern recognition, you can get pretty far in a traditional school. All I ever had to do was like remember some facts and learn the pattern. Like even in college, I got a bachelor's degree in mathematics. Grad school, same thing. Memorize some facts, notice some patterns, and then do something with that. That was it. So like, I'm not exaggerating when I say this, but I went to school for like 20 years and I probably had to try like half a dozen times. And you know, like what produced that? It was probably a school It was probably a school, and it was probably a school called Lake in the Hills Elementary School. And if you can imagine what a place called Lake in the Hills Elementary School, I'm sure you can imagine what that is. It's a great place to grow up. It produced a person that can not have to try all that hard in school. Okay, so contrast that. I don't know which MPS school Lavelle went to. I know that he's lived around here for most of his life. And even though I don't know what school he went to, I just know like the results weren't the same. Part of living here is like constantly being faced with chances to tangibly have empathy in ways that stretch us. And that was a big growth point for me, was realizing the pathway that he was put on didn't allow for the same types of outcomes as the pathway that I was put on. Because we're literally just two human beings doing the best we can with what we have. And I wonder, in the same way that it was dictated to me, memorize things, see the patterns, apply it. Like, I wonder how much of that was I wonder how much of his current situation was dictated to him. I don't know. I don't know because I wasn't there, and I don't know. But it makes me wonder how much of his life experiences were or how much of like the course of his life was set up for him, way back when he was in first, second, third grade, something like that. So, okay, so you should know this. Like, I shouldn't live here. I should not live here. It doesn't make any sense. We are not, we're white and we're not poor. So, like, we shouldn't live here. We really shouldn't. And I know that because it took 7 years to tell somebody outside of my immediate, close network of people at work about that. And honestly, it's a little disrupting, I think, to the social order, right? Like, why it doesn't make any sense. It's weird. I know that. But again, it's only weird because the color of my skin and that I'm not poor. Like, the educational system in America created me, and it created Lavelle, and like healing from 400 years of racial inequity, it's going to take a long time, and there's going to be some things that can help speed up the process. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is, if we're going to heal from 400 years of racial inequity, like, realizing our educational system produces very different outcomes with disproportionately good outcomes for people that look like me, a white guy, and then systematically like breaking that down and rebuilding it so that we equitably, we can say that for a high level of certainty, we are able to equitably create outcomes so that it's not just for people that look like me. So in order to do that on a macro level, we have to explore our own spaces on a micro level. So we can go big picture, or we can change things big picture, but we really would change things in each of our own spheres of influence. So the specifics are the same for you if you aren't, you don't live in Wisconsin. Let's say you live in Charlotte, North Carolina. Like, the philosophies and the thoughts are the same based on your micro level, because we're going to talk about some macro things. So my intended audience is basically like for the people that I work with, but it's also, again, it's like the same thing. Now, your demographics might be a little different. The untold story that is going on in your area might be different. Like, I'm sure it's way different in North Carolina than it is in up in Wisconsin. So, but the principles are basically the same. So, we are in the greatest disruption to our educational system since World War II. I wasn't even close to alive then, nor were my parents in the 1940s. And actually, there's probably not a ton of people left from that time. And I mean, I can't even imagine like serving in World War II and then 80 years later we're in a pandemic. Like, the amount of life experience that you would have with that, it's amazing. So, like, I thought this was a big deal. Like, a few years ago, we had 5 snow days in a row. That's never happened. In my 36 years of being alive, I don't remember ever having 5 snow days in a row. And it was awesome. It was wild. It was the craziest thing, right? So, like, 5 days, like, so when we thought it was coming, because it was cold days, like snow and cold, or maybe it was just cold, I don't even remember. Like, immediately I was like, all right, kids, we're going to set up the video games in the attic. It's going to be awesome. I'm going to get a bunch of stuff done at one of the rentals. You guys are going to watch the movie Snow Day over and over again and play like video games nonstop. And, you know, my wife's going to be super happy because the kids are at home. She gets to spend more time with them because she works out of her home office here in the house doing web design stuff. So, you know, she was pretty pumped about it. It was great. It was epic, right? It was like the coolest thing. So that was exciting. But when the coronavirus hit and my kids were sent home, like it was like that, but for like 3 weeks. Milwaukee Public Schools didn't have anything for them to do for 3 weeks. And I understand why, and we can talk about that probably later on. But they didn't do anything for 3 weeks. And it wasn't fun, and it wasn't exciting. And we're talking about starting virtually again. And we're starting to talk about doing things drastically different in ways that we've never had to do them before. I don't know what it was like in the 1940s, but I can't imagine. I mean, I can see some parallels, I guess, in that this is a big deal. Because of that, we're forced to create new systems. We have to figure out how we're going to do school safely. Safety, obviously, is a top priority of schools. Usually, though, it's to keep kids safe away from like a stranger, like stranger danger, or it's like to keep kids safe from another kid. Never before has it been to keep a kid safe from something that we can't see, something that we might have no signs or symptoms that is like living inside of a kid. And it's like something that we don't even know. Like we don't even know what's coming. Like the bus could drop off 5 kids with coronavirus. We have no idea. We have no idea like what's going to happen. We're going to have kids that have it. They're going to spread it. We're going to have teachers that have it. They're going to spread it. This is like a never-ending, if you're from the Midwest, this is like a never-ending tornado drill. Like the tornado siren has been going off since March. And we're like, how do we act? Should we still be sitting in the hallways with our heads covered? I don't know. Nobody knows, okay? It's not good. It's not good. We're in a tough spot here. And like, at least though we've had some time to prepare for it, so that's a bonus. In West Dallas, we're in kind of nice shape because we don't have to start school until September, and we could look and see like what some other places have done. And honestly, it's probably going to be like learn from those mistakes more than it's going to be like learn from the right things, because this is a lose-lose. Okay, this is a lose-lose. And one thing though that we got to be really careful of, and just want to kind of like put that aside. So we're in like a tough spot. This is crazy. This is disrupting. We are brand new in something that we've never had to experience. Anytime though that there's a new system created or a new way of doing things, like overall, overarching, like some people win and some people lose. Okay, it's binary. Like it's one or the other. Now it's not like you can only win or you can only lose. It's like a sliding scale. Like you might really win or you might really lose, or you could be like kind of in the middle. Very rarely is it like perfectly even. That's not probably going to happen. Okay, so virtual school. Virtual school is a thing now. It was a thing before, but when I worked, or I work at a school that in the past specialized in credit recovery, I have had a lot of experience working with students that have attended and then not done well in a virtual school. Seen a lot, probably a couple of hundred. So most of the time they failed out of virtual school because the promises made to the parents and the kids that virtual school is the answer that they've been seeking rarely pans out. It's never as simple as do the work on the computer and then we'll give you credit. It doesn't work that way. Like people win and people lose. The winners are those that continue like their learning with minimal disruption. And when we're talking about like our new virtual school setup, a minimal disruption means like you've got access to technology really easily. And we need to talk about access. We can't do it right now because I could probably talk to you about it for an hour about access. That's going to be one of the 10 episodes that we talk about, because I don't think that we all view access the same way. And because of that, we make some assumptions about kids and parents that we really probably shouldn't make. Okay, so if a kid has access to technology, decent internet, if they have a parent that can help facilitate and manage like the workflow that they're getting from the kid's teacher, and like the home and the neighborhood is like free from distractions, and Like those kids are going to be those like a kid in those types of situations. Honestly, is going to do a lot better than a kid in my neighborhood. And that's kind of like the problem that I'm coming across when we're talking about virtual school is little Alex Bruzan. I would win in the virtual school setting if this was the late 80s or early 90s. I would win, and I have a strong sense that little Lavelle would lose. I do. Even though there was 5 kids in my house and we had a small house in the suburbs of Chicago, like my mom, she would have demanded work for me to complete. And we would have been sitting down at the table or on the floor or on the couch, and we would have done that work, and we would have done it at a high level because she would have forced us to. I mean, when we think about it, like the same thing kind of happened like with my kids. So they didn't have school. They didn't have work to do. When they got work to do, it was in the form of a packet. And actually, like, when my wife went and picked it up, she grabbed a couple for the kids in the neighborhood who, by the way, like, don't have such a hard time even, like, transporting themselves to the pickup locations for the materials that, like, I don't understand how they could have accessed the materials. The materials were really low quality, like, not good. I don't want to say anything negative about Milwaukee Public Schools because I think that they're doing a lot of really great things. But I think they probably did more damage than than help. They were confusing. There wasn't a person to like sift through them. And honestly, we ended up like printing out our own worksheets like ourselves. So the point I'm trying to make is like, I love my neighbor, Patricia. I really like Lavelle. I guess I love him. But if like the pandemic was happening, like in the 90s when he was a kid and when I was a kid, like Patricia's not printing off worksheets for Lavelle to do. It's really not like we're not at the point where we have like free time and access to technology that's going to allow you to do that and the wherewithal to know like how. So there's like all this stuff about access that we could talk about. And like I don't blame we can't blame somebody for not doing like the work that we asked them to do. So we're gonna get to that. We're gonna get to that later. So okay, there's people that are gonna win and there's people that are gonna lose. In our case, there are kids that are gonna win and there's kids that are gonna lose. And I am really scared that the kids that will win are more likely to be kids that look like me, and less likely to be kids that look like Lavelle. And I'm scared of that because it isn't like everything was perfect before the virus showed up. In fact, it kind of sucked, right? You know how I know it sucks? Is because literally we have people putting up signs saying Black Lives Matter. And I know it's a movement and it's an organization, but it literally all over the place says Black Lives Matter. And it's almost like we needed to be convinced of that. Like they're like Coca-Cola is refreshing. Like Black Lives Matter. Like it's almost like it says it in so many places, like as like really like a reminder to people that look like me that yes, in fact, Black lives do matter, and we should consider maybe changing the way that we think and act. So whatever. So all I know is that we're in the greatest disruption in education since World War II. I've never before in 14 years of living here, I have never before seen so much social awareness that racial inequity exists. And I don't know if it's just I'm 36. I don't know if it's my generation's time to just see that and to act and to think differently. But I just know in the last 14 years, I have never thought that my experiences living here would matter in being able to help somebody that doesn't live here understand what it's like to be living in a poor, almost entirely all black neighborhood. So, okay, so we've got all this awareness of social inequity. Like this is going on. So we've got social inequity. Social inequity was perpetuated by racial discrimination, which came out of racist thoughts and feelings, which, leads us to look at life decisions that somebody makes. Okay, so this is the big thing. So let me just say it again. So we've got, we're more aware of racial inequity. Racial inequity has perpetuated racial discrimination, which leads or came out of racist thoughts and feelings, which is what leads us to look at the life decisions of someone not as a symptom of a poor educational experience, but as an indictment of the character of the individual. We don't have empathy for people that were put through a subpar educational process. We don't. Okay. So do you know what happens when we judge a person based on their choices without thinking about what produced those choices? We don't like the person. It's easy to dislike them. Okay, so what happens when we don't like somebody? We avoid them. And if we have enough resources, we could use a portion of those resources to stay away from that person. Or if it's a bunch of people, we could use our resources to stay away from a bunch of people. Or a bunch of people actually could use their resources to stay away from like a whole bunch of other people. Or one group could use their resources to stay away from another group. When that happens, patterns emerge. Okay, resources are used to avoid what we don't like, and we use a portion of them to position ourselves around the things we do like. Okay, I literally used to think I was insane, which is probably proof that I'm not insane, because I don't know that if you were insane that you could think that you were and then like be able to whatever. It's like a circle effect here. Okay. I used to think I was insane because I met so few people that chose to use their resources to position themselves around something that is seen as bad in an effort to change the bad to good. Like that was our original intent in living in the inner city, like to help the neighborhood, like to make it go from bad to good. But this weird thing happened. It worked. Like, it's not bad anymore. In fact, it's good. And here's the catch. The only thing that changed to make it go from bad to good was me. I am the only thing that changed. People still get murdered. There was two, one over there and one over there this summer. People still get, okay. Poverty still destroys people's lives here. Destroys it. There are still little black boys that go to school here that if you live in the 53206 zip code, you've got a 50% chance of ending up in prison at some point in your life. So we still have a system, a societal system or educational system, which are really the same thing, that takes little black boys, puts them through the system, and we end up with half of them that live in my zip code ending up going to prison. I can talk to you more about that later on and go all sorts of different directions with this. Okay. The thing is, bad things still happen here, but this is a good neighborhood. This is a good neighborhood because I believe it's a good neighborhood. Okay, I came to that conclusion a couple of years ago. At first I started thinking, it's not that bad. That was kind of how it always started, right? It's not that bad. Wasn't the same as living in a suburb, but it wasn't that different. It kind of morphed, though, from being like not to like just that it wasn't bad to like, well, it's not bad and it's just different. And now I'm like, well, actually, it's all good. Like whether it's different or not, like this is good. Like I like the people here. It's good. I was the one, me. I was the one that once deemed it a bad place. And I don't know if we can get into this in the series of 10 here. But actually, it's like sometimes I wonder if it's actually like that simple. Like if we just stopped seeing the inner city as bad and we reframed it as good, and like we could celebrate it rather than like blame everybody that lives here for perpetuating what goes on here, and like hating them and then like locking them up in prison because they do some things because of some bad stuff that happened to them when they were kids. Like, or I think that there's probably something like that. Like honestly, like if all 1.5 million people in the Metro Milwaukee area like saw 53206 as really good, like what? How could that be bad for the neighborhood? Like how could that not like do that? Like what kind of actions like could come out of that if like we all just changed our attitude? So that's more of like a 53206 thing, not necessarily an education thing, but actually it's all related. And I think that's kind of the point of what I'm trying to tell you right now. Like I'm literally in a financial position where I could sell the 4 houses that we own and I could buy one house in a suburb, and I have no desire to do that, like none. So, the thing is like, okay, so if it's not bad, but the outcomes here aren't where, like, we're not producing good outcomes, like what's going on, and I'm convinced that it's poverty. And over 14 years, like, if you believe that poverty is cyclical, that means it's going to run in cycles, and that means that over 14 years, like, you might like be able to see a cycle develop. And so I have neighbors and I have friends that I have known that I can see the cycle go from one generation to another, to another, to another. So like, it's just really easy. It's just really easy to let the cycle perpetuate. So, I think I'm going to leave that stumble in here because I don't have time to re-edit all of this. And so, if you are put off by probably like a lack of great inflection or by like a lack of high quality of production, that's okay. I don't have time. There's too many things that we need to get. There's too many pieces of information that need to be shared. I can go back and redo this later. I just don't have time right now. This is too important. Okay, so the cycle is perpetuated much easier when a majority of the poor people live in a few areas, like my neighborhood. Okay, so a contributing factor to that, in part, is how the metro area of Milwaukee has decided to organize itself. Remember, we're talking about the story that we find ourselves in. Certainly, this isn't the only cause, but it can't help the problem. Milwaukee is generally accepted to be one of, if not, the most segregated metro area in the country. How many people have you ever known? Okay, this is a question, like a legitimate question. How many people have you ever known that make a decision about where they are going to live based on their contribution or participation in segregation? I have never heard a single person say, oh, I don't like the carpet and the paint color of this house, but it's in an area where I am going to help desegregate. I've never heard anybody say that. There probably are some, but I think it's much more inclined to say, I want to move in an area that's safe and that has good schools, in one of those two orders. In either, one is more important. All right, good schools and safety are usually at the top of the list of must-haves for like a younger home buyer. So if a person chooses where they live based on the education their kid will get and the general perception of safety, they are never going to choose to live in my neighborhood. And that is why it's strange when I see a white person around here, and I'm around here as in my neighborhood. So does that mean like if somebody says that it's safe and the schools are good, does that mean it's okay for my neighbors to go to crappy schools and live in fear? Like the same neighbors that don't actually have a choice on where they live because they grew up going to crappy schools and living in fear and they're stuck in this cycle of poverty? I don't know. I don't know the specifics about. I don't know how you have a metro area that's hyper segregated without also having some serious racial tension. I mean, I feel it. It's everywhere. Two people that look differently interacting with each other. Like that. There's an untold story of racial tension that can exist. Now, tension goes away when relationships are formed and friendships are created. And I just got to mention this, by the way. The absence of feeling racial tension doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. It means that you don't notice it. It means it's possible, and it's possible like somebody that's like reading this blog post or listening to this, or a recording of me talking about this, has oriented themselves so far away from anyone that is different than them that they don't even have an opportunity to know that racial tension exists. And that is what happens in a hyper-segregated space. It's easy to forget about anything other than what is right in front of you. And if what if right in front of you is the same, and if what is right in front of you is all the same, why would you ever have to think about someone that's different? Okay, so now we got to drill down to West Allis, West Milwaukee. Okay, I am not a historian. I like statistics, but I'm not going to use them to prove a point, at least not right now. So we got to talk generalities. Our school district has historically been majority white, and now, very recently, We are minority white. That shift does not happen overnight. It happens gradually based on a bunch of different factors. Okay, so I am of the understanding that diversity is good. And diversity is actually one of the best things our school district has going for it. Diversity should be celebrated systematically. Partially because diversity actually allows us to do equity work. We can't do equity work if everyone is the same, because we actually have to try to create equitable outcomes within the system that we have control over. Okay, so for our school district, and for any employee in any other school district, we find ourselves in a story that has the potential to be framed one of two ways. We are either championing equity, or we are the champions of equity. We are trying to create equity, or we are furthering inequity. It's binary, again, on a sliding scale, just like people winning and losing, like anytime a new system is created. The thing is like, we got to be intentional about like how we are going to, which areas we are going to push for winning, and which areas we are going to be okay with losses in. So hear me out on this. So when a new system is created, someone wins and someone loses. The thing is, we could be intentional about making sure the wins are for those who need them most, and the losses are minimal for those that won't be negatively affected by them. Okay, that's what this whole like series of blog posts and recordings is all what it's going to be about. How do we create equitable outcomes during the greatest disruption in education since World War II, which just so happens to coincide with the highest social awareness of racial inequities that I have seen in the last 15 years, and is just so happening taking place in one of the most segregated metro areas in the country, which just so happens to be transitioning from majority white to minority white. We have an opportunity to create an equitable system, or to further create an equitable system. And I got to tell you something. If I hadn't spent the last 14 years reframing my own views on race and equity and injustice, like most of my opinions would be useless. My hope with this project is that we can separate like my educational, like working experience, which I've barely talked about, with my experience living in the inner city. And I guess maybe what I'm actually trying to say is like, I have nothing important to add to the conversation about our school district, Wisconsin, like Wisconsin's educational policies, or like American educational policies for that matter, without my experience living in the inner city. Those two things are tied much. I am realizing those two things are tied much more closely than I actually had ever given them credit for. So I guess maybe like what I'm trying to say is like, maybe that's why I always feel the need to like preface like a piece of content that I create. Because like, I don't really think that you should care. Like, I don't think that you should care about Alex Bruzan, deeper learning coach, Docky High School. I mean, I have some cool ideas, and I'm good at memorizing stuff and I can see patterns. But that's honestly like, and I think outside the box, but that's like kind of it. Like, that's it. Okay. See, I would much rather you think about me as Alex Bruzan, advocate for Lavelle and for every other person living in my neighborhood and in the 53206 zip code, and whatever version of that exists in the city that you're in. And when I'm suggesting that we think differently or consider something, I'm not doing it for personal gain, or really, I'm really not doing it to climb some educational hierarchical ladder. I don't care about that. I'm saying these things because I have been re-educated by living in the inner city, and I want to share what I've learned. And honestly, I just want to share what I've learned so that someday my neighbors' kids that are the same age as my kids, that and I got a whole thing I got to talk to you about that. Because I think it's gonna, I think there's some reframing we can do that'll be helpful. But I want to share what I've learned so that someday my neighbors' kids will have the same access to an educational experience that is going to allow them with the same ease of access to financial freedom through a fulfilling career as my kids who are sitting over there watching YouTube videos of somebody playing a video game will have. So that's what this is all about. I just want you, the listener, again, to hopefully be able to separate those two things, because again, I'm just a regular guy. I've got a couple of decent ideas, but that's about it. I have some insights, though, that are based on my experiences here, and I think when we realize the story that we're finding ourselves in, we can start to make some decisions and ask ourselves some questions that are going to lead to more equitable outcomes. So that's the goal of this project. I'm committing, like, whenever I say, like, if I set out on a video that I was going to do something, I'm going to do it. So there'll be 10 of these, and this is episode 1. Thanks.